If it was just Indonesia, or if it was such a major resource, or it was under attack or had been attacked directly, then it would have been a bit different.
Yeah.
But you just look around. I mean, you go to Cambodia, go to Vietnam, you go to Thailand. All of them have disputes.
Yeah.
Philippines, right? So whole of Southeast Asia is to do with Chinese expansionism in the South China Sea, etc., etc. But is that going to lead to war? Is that preventing commerce? Is that preventing people visiting these places? That's not the case.
Welcome to the Gist on Strat News Global. I am Surya Gangadharan. My guest is Satish Mishra. He is the head of the Arthashastra Institute in Bali, Indonesia. It's a think tank, and we're going to talk to him about the think tank, what it does, and India and Indonesia, where there's a lot happening since the visit of President Prabowo to India in January. You may recall he was the chief guest at the Republic Day celebrations. Satish Mishra, welcome, glad to have you.
Thank you.
Arthashastra Institute, very, very Indian, and we are accustomed to that. I understand you're from Bali too.
Yes.
You've been living there for many years.
Yes, yes.
So what is the purpose of the Arthashastra Institute?
Well, it's two different purposes. The first is to close a number of information gaps and knowledge gaps that we have on Indonesia itself, because the country has completely been transformed in the last 25 years with great speed.
Yeah.
And so there's some things that we know quite a lot about, there's some things we don't. But the main focus is in finding ways to bring India and Indonesia much closer together. They've been talking about it since Bandung in the mid-1950s, and we're still going on parallel tracks. So the purpose of the Arthashastra Institute is to be a handholder, to be a catalyst, to be a facilitator for both sides. And so far, there seems to be a lot of enthusiasm to do that.
So why India and Indonesia? I know all that civilizational stuff is there, which some people may understand, others may not. But leaving that aside, what is so important about India and Indonesia getting together in terms of, I'm looking at the geopolitics here.
Well, first of all, the civilization matters. If you see what is going on in Western Europe or what is happening in the United States and elsewhere, so that sense of identity politics matters. But okay, let's set that aside for a second. There are a number of things which are rather similar about India and Indonesia, and we make them fairly easy partners in a way. The first one now is a new system of government in Indonesia. It has moved from military rule to a pretty sophisticated democracy. Most people don't know that all the elections in Indonesia are all held on one day, and the results come out, very rapidly, very different to what happens here. It's a very diverse country, so that is one. But the second thing is that both of these have a very dynamic domestic market now. And the market is growing very fast because they have young populations. People are very mobile, so there's a lot of internal migration looking for new opportunities, etc. So that's the second reason, in terms of penetration of business and in terms of trade, investments, etc. And there's a third reason. The third reason really is that in the modern multipolar world, countries also have to find ways to work together on issues which can only be successful if you work in large scale. So digital technology is one classic example, including AI.
Yeah.
Issues of climate change are another. Issues of health, particularly pandemics and how to contain them and how to manage them and so on is a third one. And also research and development on completely new technologies in industrial production. We used to talk about the fourth industrial revolution. We may have already arrived at the fifth.
Yeah.
So those require joint working. So I think, the culture and civilization, of course, the familiarity, the democratic political systems and much greater transparency than you would have otherwise. And plus the economic opportunities that exist as a result of the market. And finally, the joint work that has to be done in new areas which are very challenging.
So vis-a-vis China, how does that relationship work out?
It's nothing new about Indonesia. The Chinese in the whole of Southeast Asia, and indeed most of Africa and elsewhere,
Yeah.
Are expanding their economic prowess, and they clearly want to be a major player in the world market. Their main attention, I think, is towards the US.
Yeah.
They have a long history of bitterness against foreign powers who divided them and humiliated them. I mean, think of that whole opium war. What was that? It was just that you're forcing the Chinese to become addicted so you can sell your opium. Now, it wasn't that long ago in the public memory. So a lot of those humiliations have taken place. And, they have a history with India. 2 centuries ago, they were the two dominant civilizations in the world. So I think that it's a very complicated kind of relationship, and depends on which bit you look at. So I think it's time to look at this afresh, look at where our interests are, and also where we can compete and where we can't compete, and not worry about where we can't compete unless we build up the capacity to do so. Not just have it in another round of grievances that we can drum up, against China.
So one keeps reading about tensions in the Natuna Straits and so on between the Indonesians and the Chinese. Does this play out much in the Indonesian public sphere?
It does a little bit, but so many the whole region is so full of skirmishes.
Yeah.
Right? If it was just Indonesia, or if it was such a major resource, or it was under attack or had been attacked directly, then it would have been a bit different.
Yeah.
But you just look around. I mean, you go to Cambodia, go to Vietnam, you go to Thailand. All of them have disputes.
Yeah.
Philippines, right? So whole of Southeast Asia is to do with Chinese expansionism in the South China Sea, etc., etc. But is that going to lead to war? Is that preventing commerce? Is that preventing people visiting these places? That's not the case. So again, I think like our border skirmishes in Nagaland and elsewhere, we have to put this in perspective. The very fact that you have a disagreement or even you have a warship coming to the area doesn't mean it's not an extension threat, as some people might imagine.
Yeah. So when India and Indonesia talk, President Prabowo was here. What do we talk about? A lot of it has played out in the press. What does Indonesia want from India? What is it they're looking at?
Well, I think to a large extent they themselves haven't firmed up what they really want. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do also. I think the first thing they want is, a fairly stable market for their largest export to India, which is palm oil. And the palm oil, like all these commodities, is mired in a series of rules as well as non-tariff barriers, etc., etc. So they would like to negotiate that in such a way that that those are reduced. But the major problem there is really that we have a structural deficit, in the sense that the Indians can buy $8 or $9 billion worth of palm oil, but the Indonesians only buy $1 or $1.5 billion of Indian goods. And if you talk to them, if you talk to the government, they said, we haven't restricted, we're not promoting any other, this is a private market. So let the Indians come and build their brands here. And even our biggest brands are really not known in Indonesia. And they know Tatas because of Jaguar and Range Rover and so on. But there's another Tatas, which is a big property development firm. So most Indians, when they talk, or Indonesians, when they talk about Tata, they immediately say, well, this building is built by Tatas. There's nothing to do with it, right? So I think it's, those are fairly simple things, but Our firms have gone into Indonesia, 90% of them do not have a market entry strategy. You know. So in terms of building the brand, instead of setting up a supply route in terms of spare parts and this and that. But it's not because the Indonesian government is somebody tripped them over because, the Chinese have instructed them to do it. I think that's is one of these theories that needs to be discussed, and some proper proof needs to be produced here.
So it would appear that the lack of information coming out of India is also, there's a lack of information coming out of Indonesia. So Indians don't know very much when they go in and without any preparation or study and then try and do business there.
Yeah, I mean, it's not only in the field of business, by the way. In terms of government missions and so on, it's the same thing. Because just take in India, friends here are telling me that they find it difficult to find more than 5 or 6 people who even know Bahasa Indonesia.
Yeah.
There are no major institutes here which are, have centers of Indonesian studies. Although without Indonesia, you don't have Southeast Asia in a way, right? There's no identity in that sense. So we even have places here who have Institute of Israeli Studies, but we don't have one of Indonesian studies. So that's a big problem. And the second thing is that in terms of scientific research and so on, where there are many areas where Indonesians have quite a lot of capacity, but they don't advertise it very well. That's especially true in the context of digital technology and so on. Bandung was a place which has the largest number of hackers in the world, and they're now being turned into
Ethical
developers and in AI and so on. So understanding, there's a lack of understanding all across the board, and so the faster we try to close that, the more confidence we'll have, instead of guessing. When I talk to diplomats in Jakarta, or I talk to diplomats in Delhi, the first thing they say is, are the Indians really interested in us? And the Indians will say, the Indians will say, but the Indonesians are already Chinese, are they really interested in us? And so this is the level of which the conversation, and it's time to be serious about this. It's in our national interest, it's our strategic interest. The reason is that if India and Indonesia were much closer together, you're talking about an Asia which will have 50% of the world's population. And in a multipolar world, we could imagine a duopolar or bipolar Asia, where China, Vietnam, and a range of other countries where they have very good historical links, Mongolia could be one, and India, Indonesia, and parts of Southeast Asia and so on could be the other. Now, if that is the case, the interesting thing, Surya, is that the population is fairly evenly divided between these two. And one has a young and growing population, the other has an aging population. So in this situation, I can't imagine a scene where they're going to be fighting major wars with each other. Even India and Indonesia have never historically fought a major war, right? And let alone the Indonesians. So in that situation, we could see an era of peace, of course a lot of competition, but peace, a lot of people-to-people movement, spread of languages, joint works, labs and technologies and so on, which is very different from where we are now. But that will totally define or redefine the global order. And so it's time to start connecting the dots instead of really looking at our narrow area and seeing everything through a China lens, which
Now, through your institute, you have been trying to work on trying to bridge some of these issues. So, what are the challenges you come up with? What are the solutions you come up with?
Well, that's a great question. We are relatively new, right? And the reason we set the Arthashastra Institute was because of continuously hearing why our two countries couldn't get closer together, but then not really having a solution. And then when I came to Delhi a year ago and started looking around, it really was very obvious that we didn't know anything about Indonesia. And it was the same thing in Jakarta. They didn't know anything about us. So how do you become close to any entity? How do you do business with them if you know almost nothing about them? You know, starting with, imagine, is there anybody in India who's never heard of Apollo or Godrej? Even these are not very big international by international standards, right? But everybody's heard of them here. Not a single person heard them in Indonesia. So it's in business, it's in politics, of course it's in history and culture, because we feel that everything they've got is a result of Hindu and Buddhism from here. Even though they forget that it was the Hindu Brahmins and other groups that chased the Buddhists out of here. So it's not like it was a very harmonious kind of relationship, right? So there are many things that we need to rediscover and get the right people together with a view at least having an objective opinion, you know, and that is what the Arthashastra is designed to do. It's also designed to help in, you know, preparing visits and missions and so on, in a very simple way. For instance, the commonest thing is people go, when they have a disagreement, they start yelling and shouting, and they interrupt all the time. You go in Indonesia and people are talking even for half an hour and nobody will interrupt out of courtesy, just considered very impolite. So you're going into a diplomatic situation and you're not aware of some of these basic things. I'll give you another very simple example. Very simple example. You go to any senior meeting in Indonesia and immediately they will bring out the tea, coffee and bits of food and so on. And the remarkable thing is not a single person will touch any of that. You know, the meeting will carry on, the tea has got cold. In India, our host will say, please have some tea because it's getting cold, right? Then nobody says anything. And then, when the meeting's about to be closed, your host will say, oh, please have some tea. And then people take one sip and push off. And nobody will touch most of the food and so on, right? So there's such a simple culture. So imagine going to a meeting, and the first thing you do is grab the biscuits and grab then the other guys are looking like, you know, you're coming from a famine zone. Then it's not very, not a good way to start this kind of. Now, this is, you know, it's not a joke. It actually happens. But there are many of these things, many of these things. And the other thing is, which we also is clear, is that after the meeting, the process of communicating the results of the meeting through the administration until, you know, preparing particular briefs and so on, which can then be brought back and people in authority can make decisions. That mechanism is not very strong.
Here or
in Indonesia, it's not strong. And so there is a lot of disconnects. So sometimes they act very fast, sometimes they act slow, but it's not because that they are in some kind of conspiratorial relationship with something else. It's because it's a totally new democracy. And it's not only the military, it's a military reform, it's civil service reform, it's a reform of the political system, their elections, their political parties, the central bank, the Central Audit Commission, the Anti-Corruption Commission. All these have been done in a matter of the first decade in a way. So of course there are gaps and there are issues, but you know, we have a bureaucracy we have more or less inherited from the British, right? And we haven't really reformed that very well. Those guys set up completely new things and it's working, you know, and the economy is doing well. There's no major threat of fundamentalist Islam. They haven't gone the route of the Arab countries. And they are coming out and showing that they are likely to be a major power. And perhaps a balancing factor between India and China, you know. And this is to be welcome and not something that we will not be able to get in any other way. So that's where I come from, essentially.
You mentioned fundamental Islam. Now, this is a Muslim majority country which has transitioned from an authoritarian, military-ish kind of dictatorship to a democracy without getting into that Islamist, fundamentalist kind of thing. That's unusual, isn't it? I mean, we are conditioned to see from the West Asian and Central Asian points of view where things tend to be very violent.
Yes.
This is very different.
It's totally different. It's totally different, and most people don't know about it. The first thing is that moderate Islam is not new. It was even under Suharto, under military rule, where things were very controlled. There were large social movements. So they were engaged in health and welfare and so on and so on. And after the democratic election, some of them formed political parties. But the first thing to realize, just emphasizing what you were saying, is that no Islamic party has really got more than 8 or 9% of the popular vote. So it's not the case there's a huge surge. That's one. But the most important thing here is that just after independence, there was a move to put Sharia in the constitution. That was never successful. And the Indonesians adopted this philosophy of Panchashila. And it's still there as the national philosophy. And all the kids, including my little kids, have to learn Panchashila. It's a subject, you know. And a lot of it is based on, you know, rights and tolerance for others and belief in God, but not to the detriment of others, you know, and so on and so on. So there is an underlying philosophy. The Islamic organizations also, you'll be surprised to know, there are two major ones. One is the Muhammadiyah, which is more if sort of, if you like, the urban group, and then Nadatul Ulama. Now the interesting thing is that they actually own hundreds of universities. And these universities are not like our Jamia Millia or you know, Aligarh and so on, you know. But they are teaching regular courses, you know, and they are competitive. So again, they have madrasas, some of which may be, you know, a bit more religious orthodox than others, depending on whether they're in East Java, West Java, wherever they are. And they, you know, they're not breeding a whole series of firebrands, you know, and going and then making them chemical engineers so they can make bombs. It's not that kind of situation, you know. And I'll give you one last example. Nothing to do with political parties. There are so many families in Indonesia where one member of the family will be Buddhist, another member of the family will be Catholic, and the third one will be Muslim or a Hindu, right? And it's not an unusual thing, right? And also, I mean, we don't know all the reasons why that has happened, but certainly one of the reasons is that when Islam spread in Indonesia, it was through trade, through association, and some of that trade had been going on even before Islam. Right? And so that is how that interaction was built up, you know. A bit like our Sindhi community and others, when you go to Africa or everywhere, you know, they even take Christian names, you know, in this adjustment. So that becomes a normal process of give and take and so on, you know. So I think there's a lot to learn and a lot to understand about Indonesia, you know, that we can't just take our structures, and because that's a democratic country, and simply say this is exactly how the civil service will work, and this is how their, you know, their government systems will work. This is how financial allocation will work, and so on. And they've done very well because they didn't get much international help, by the way, you know, not like the Russians and the rest. So they didn't get much. In the economic sphere, they got a lot of intervention and some support by the World Bank and IMF, and but all the donors together clubbed behind IMF and put conditionalities on Indonesia, which were very aggressive. On the political side, there wasn't too much support. So they actually did all this by themselves. And they did it in a matter of 2 years. From the time Habibie came to power, the first elections in 1999, and the huge decentralization drive they had was in the year 2000. Which country can do reforms of that scale in 2 years and stay intact? You know, Indonesia is one example. And it's time we went and looked at this very seriously.
So last question, you're involved in this entire thing of trying to get things together, bridging the knowledge gap. What do you think we should do? I mean, outline 3 steps that you think both sides could take.
First step is to, in country of this size, set up at least 10 centers for Indonesian studies. Okay? And choose the curriculum carefully so that it's not only tilted in favor of what happened in the Mauryan Empire or whatever it was, right? But choose the subjects which are contemporary also.
Yeah.
So that is one. So 10 each, that gives you 20 institutions. Even if they have 100 students doing that, that's already you got a large number of people who know something.
Yeah.
And who can speak each other's language and so on. And that's a recruiting base from which people who are interested in Indonesia or government doing some work there can tap in the same way that we tap in business colleges and others. So that's the first step. The second step is to also, do this training of the kind I'm talking about, where you don't make the silliest, commonest mistakes, and do case studies of that kind, because that leaves a very bitter taste in people's mouth. I know very senior people who've gone to WTO or have gone to other negotiations, and they just found the Indian teams to be super aggressive, a bit rude, kept interrupting, blah, blah, blah. And they decided just to keep quiet. I mean, now, this could be exaggerated, but these are respectable friends of mine who've got a long track record. So they felt that it's just the chemistry, in a way, which is the soft skills, if you like, that we keep talking about for everybody else, right? It's something that we need to learn. And I think the third thing is to also have a longer term strategic program in which there are two elements which are critical. One is these future problems that I was talking about, but the other is that you need these are some of the uses of democracy. You cannot share information, you cannot easily work together if you don't have civil society, if you don't have media, if you don't have research centers and so on, who are free to develop relatively without intervention.
Yeah.
These two countries actually have that. Now, there may be all kinds of rough edges, but it's clearly true that nobody is sitting here controlling you and controlling us here, right? And the same in Indonesia. So this is some of the uses of democracy going into the future. And again, so I think that kind of dialogue and a longer term strategic view. And so I think those are three steps. They're not very expensive, but it's changing the mindset. And, and of course, a lot of our people are going to Bali for honeymoon and so on, and I think it's wonderful. But then while they're there, the honeymoon, they could also benefit from some of these other experiences,
And in your meetings in government here, you get the impression there is a desire to get this momentum moving?
Well, you'll know more about the desire than I will, but what I've seen is a tremendous support for the idea of the Arthashastra, way beyond my expectations. And the second is some amusement about the name itself. But after but in a very positive way, But the other thing is people actually saying, this is also somebody you should meet, and we are linking with media, we're linking with the main think tanks and the universities and the government circles and some business people in a matter of maybe 3 months. Now, you live in Delhi, you can imagine if somebody comes in totally by themselves from outside and starts doing this, they'd be lucky if they meet a couple of people in the entire time, and they'll be very lucky if they get more than a few minutes. That's not the case here. So there is a momentum, there is, and that this multipolar world allows us to be free to think of other scenarios. And I think that's what's going on. So I'm very impressed. Indonesia is the same thing now. So many people, even from the Indian diaspora, have phoned me and say, how can we help? This is such an exciting idea. How can we actually contribute? This is not something the average NGO gets in its initial phase, but it's there, and the momentum is there.
Satish Mishra, on that positive note, there's a lot which is left unsaid. I mean, a lot more areas to explore. And hopefully, as this relationship moves forward and your endeavors, of course, also go forward, we'll be able to talk more about this in the weeks to come. So all the very best to you, and thank you very much for finding time to sit with us.
Thank you very much. And these things work when they are part of a longer effort. And so from both sides, I hope that that next time we'll be hosting you and a number of other friends together also in many occasions. So let's do that.
Absolutely looking forward. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
That's all we have for you on this edition of The Gist. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on social media. Thank you very much. Good day. So when India and Indonesia talk, President Prabowo is here. What do we talk about? What I mean, a lot of it has played out in the press. What does Indonesia want from India? What is it they're looking at?
Well, I think to a large extent they themselves haven't firmed up what they really want. I mean, it's not an easy thing to do also.
Yeah.
I think the first thing they want is, a fairly stable market for their largest export to India, which is palm oil.
Yeah.
And the palm oil, like all these commodities, is mired in a series of rules as well as non-tariff barriers,
Yeah.
etc., etc. So they would like to negotiate that in such a way that that those are reduced. But the major problem there is really that we have a structural deficit, in the sense that the Indians can, buy $8 or $9 billion worth of palm oil, but the Indonesians only buy $1 or $1.5 billion of Indian goods. And if you talk to them, if you talk to the government, they said, we haven't restricted, we're not promoting any other, this is a private market. So let the Indians come and build their brands here. And even our biggest brands are really not known in Indonesia. And, they know Tatas
Yeah.
because of Jaguar and Range Rover and so on. But there's another Tatas, which is a big property development firm. So most Indians, when they talk, or Indonesians, when they talk about Tata, they immediately say, well, this building is built by Tatas. There's nothing to do with that, right? So I think it's, those are fairly simple things. But our firms have gone into Indonesia, 90% of them do not have a market entry strategy. So in terms of building the brand, instead of setting up a supply route in terms of spare parts and this and that. But it's not because the Indonesian government is somebody tripped them over because, the Chinese have instructed them to do it. I think that's is one of these theories that needs to be discussed, and some proper proof needs to be produced here.
One keeps reading about tensions in the Natuna Straits and so on between the Indonesians and the Chinese. Does this play out much in the Indonesian public sphere?
It does a little bit, but so many, the whole region is so full of skirmishes.
Yeah.
Right? If it was just Indonesia, or if it was such a major resource, or it was under attack or had been attacked directly, then it would have been a bit different.
Yeah.
But you just look around. I mean, you go to Cambodia, go to Vietnam, you go to Thailand, all of them have disputes.
Yeah.
Philippines, right? So whole of Southeast Asia is to do with Chinese expansionism in the South China Sea, etc., etc. But is that going to lead to war? Is that preventing commerce? Is that preventing people visiting these places? That's not the case.